Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chairman of the Georgia Chamber Board of Directors, Ernest Greer.
Good morning. Let's try that again. Good morning. It is a gorgeous day in Georgia, and it is a gorgeous day in Macon, and I want to welcome each and one of you to the Georgia Chamber's 2014 Congressional Luncheon. We have a packed house, as everyone sees, and we are excited about the program that is to come. There are a couple of housekeeping matters that I want to speak to before I make the introduction of a great Georgian. One, Congressman Tom Graves, who's on the program, wanted to be with us. He can no longer be with us because he's recovering from foot surgery. We're fortunate, however, to have Congressman Sanford Bishop joining us. He was able to change his schedule, and Congressman, we appreciate and are delighted that you have found an opportunity to join us. At this time, I must tell you that I am humbled and honored to introduce our Governor, Nathan Deal. As many of you know, in 2011, we were fighting with one of the biggest economic crises that faced this nation, faced Georgia, and our cities across the land. While mired in that abyss, we had a governor who dared to do more, who challenged us as a state to look to the future, who made it his goal to make this state the #1 state in the nation for doing business. You see, our governor understood that while immediacy was an issue, that our future was also at issue. And with pure leadership, hard work, and determination, we achieved that goal. Site Selection Magazine picked Georgia as the #1 state in the nation to do business in December 2013. And CNBC in June of 2014 also selected Georgia as the #1 state in the nation to do business. Now, some of you may say it was luck. Some of you may say it was happenstance. But I will tell you that any of you who feel that way is absolutely wrong. I had the proud privilege of serving as one of 23 business leaders across this state who was tasked by the governor through the Georgia Competitiveness Initiative to determine a long-term strategy so that Georgia could become the #1 state in the nation for business. And so I'm honored to bring our governor before you, and I'm honored to tell you that we Georgians love people who exude hard work and leadership. And for what this governor has done for this state in bringing focus to what we are doing as a community, as a state, and in our various cities, we owe it to our governor that he spends another 4 years in office. With that, Governor, please come forward and join me in welcoming our Governor, Nathan Deal.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Thank you, Ernest, for that very kind introduction. Thanks to the Chamber for inviting me to give a very brief welcome to all of you. It's good to see some of my former colleagues from Congress here. I'm glad they're there and that I'm here. But they work hard to do a good job to represent the interest of our state. The Chamber has been an important part of the team that I have worked with to take this state to the #1 designation. I believe in teamwork. I believe in partnering with people. And I believe we have unprecedented cooperation at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. And that's what it takes to advance the cause of what you all stand for, and that is to make our state better for ourselves, for our children, and our grandchildren. You have been very helpful to me and to our Department of Economic Development as we have worked to bring more jobs to our state. And the good news is we are rapidly approaching 300,000 new private sector jobs in this state since January of 2011. I'm pleased to see our Executive Director of our Department of Economic Development here, Chris Carr. And I want to pay tribute to what Chris and his team do literally around the world. Since I became governor, our Department of Economic Development has had almost 1,400 projects in which they have been involved. And they have been successful in many of those projects, and we have seen about $17.7 billion of capital investment as a direct result of the projects that they were working on. They have worked with local chambers of commerce and local departments of economic development. And despite what some would say, these are professionals. They don't just go to ribbon cuttings. They work extremely hard to make the ribbon cuttings possible. Thank you for what you do. You didn't come to hear me. You came to hear the discussion and the debate between those who would be our next senator from the state of Georgia. I thank both of them for being willing to step up and offer themselves for public service. That in itself is a great contribution. And I thank those who are their colleagues in Washington who will continue to serve with distinction there as well. But thank you all for showing support for the system of government that has made our country and our state great. It is not something that is achieved without hard work. The success of local communities and of the state and of our nation depends on people like you, people of goodwill, people who are willing to devote time and money and effort to try to make our living conditions and the future of our state and our nation better. Thank you for being here today.
Please welcome Congressman Austin Scott.
Please join me in standing for the presentation of our colors from the Robins Air Force Base Honor Guard.
Please remain standing as we are joined by Congressman Sanford Bishop.
For our national anthem, I'm pleased to introduce Staff Sergeant Celia Harrison from the 461st Maintenance Group at Robins Air Force Base.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleam? broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the rampires we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please remain standing as Congressman Tom Price gives our invocation.
Please join me in prayer. Oh Lord, dear Lord, thank you for your wonderful blessings, especially the blessing of liberty. We are awed by your power and humbled by your grace. We thank you for the privilege of living in this great land, in this great state. We're honored by the opportunity to serve in so many ways, and we thank you for the gift of work and of service. So often we fall short. Forgive us. Give us the wisdom to recognize the opportunity to heal, to help, to care, to love. Be with us all as we return to our homes and our communities. Please watch over those who protect our liberty and our freedom, both abroad and here at home. Thank you so very much for this nourishment and for the hands that prepared and served it today. I offer this prayer in the name of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
You can be seated. At this time, I would like to thank some of the people who have made this event possible and our special guests. First, I want to thank the Georgia Association of Broadcasters and the Georgia News Network for co-hosting today's forum. We've appreciated the leadership, the partnership, and the time and the expertise that you've shared to make this day possible. Another partner we would like to thank is WMAZ for generously providing the news feed for today's event. I also would like to thank our presenting sponsor, AT&T, for your support, as well as our other 2014 Congressional Luncheon sponsors. They're listed in our program, and please be sure to thank them for their support. Finally, I would like to recognize some of the special guests here with us today. And of course, we appreciate Governor Nathan Deal coming and being with us today, Congressman Austin Scott, Congressman Sanford Bishop, Congressman Tom Price, for their participation in today's program. I would also like to recognize the following statewide elected officials. But in the interest of time, I would ask that you please hold your applause. And I would ask that when I call your name, you please stand. First, I would like to recognize Governor Nathan Deal. I would also like to recognize Congressman Sanford Bishop, Congressman Tom Price, Congressman Austin Scott, Agriculture Commissioner Gary Black, Insurance Commissioner Ralph Hudgens, Secretary of State Brian Kemp, Public Service Commissioner Doug Everett, Public Service Commissioner Bubba McDonnell, the Justices of the Supreme Court with us today, the Justices of the Georgia Court of Appeals, members of the General Assembly, members of the Georgia Chamber's Board of Directors, and our partners from the local chambers throughout the state. And finally, I would like to express our gratitude to the men and women in armed services who've been part of our today's program and who are seated in the audience. Please stand so that we may thank you too for your service to our country and to our state. So I say thank you all for joining us today on this gorgeous day, and I will now turn the stage over to our moderator, Georgia news anchor John Pruitt. Thank you.
You sure there's water up there? There is. You see it right next to it.
Podium? Are we supposed to have lavaliers? Forgive me for not knowing that. Anyway, welcome. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. I'm John Pruitt, retired newscaster for WSB, and they pulled me out of retirement and dusted me off and put me up here to moderate a forum, which has attracted a good deal of attention. We're sold out here, and this will be televised live by WMAZ, perhaps some other outlets, certainly radio outlets carrying it live. We will be seeing rebroadcast of the forum on other media outlets around Georgia. So it's going to receive wide exposure because this is the first time candidates David Perdue and Michelle Nunn have been on the same stage. So in order to preserve the utmost time for this exchange, we would ask you to refrain from applause or audience reaction, with the exception of when the candidates are introduced and at the conclusion of the forum. I want to tell you a few words about the format that was agreed to by both campaigns after some negotiation. Each candidate will have an opening statement of 5 minutes. Following the 5-minute opening statement from Michelle Nunn and David Perdue, we'll go into a series of questions that will be posed by me. Through prior agreement, those questions will cover 4 basic topic areas: immigration, transportation, defense, and health care. The candidates know the topics, they do not know the questions, which will come from me. If there is a need for rebuttal, that will be at my discretion, and I also have the ability to follow up. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each question posed to them. Then following that, there will be closing statements of 2 minutes apiece. So are we ready for the introductions? Thank you very much. I might need this. We will be seated at center stage, and I'll be in the middle. The candidates will be at my right and left. And as I move to the center stage, let me be sure everything's working here with this mic. Yes, it is. We'll be passing the mic. So, we're set to go. Please join me in welcoming the Republican and Democratic candidates for the U.S. Senate seat from Georgia, Republican David Perdue and Democrat Michelle Nunn. Please be seated. Welcome to you both, and we'll begin with a 5-minute opening statement. First opening statement comes from David Perdue.
Well, good afternoon. It's nice to be here with the Chamber. Appreciate you guys hosting us today. I feel right at home today for 2 reasons. One, like you, I've spent the last 40 years working in the global economy, competing, providing products and services to customers, and in so doing, adding value to our economy and creating opportunities for people to provide for themselves and their families. The second reason is I am home. I was born down the street at Macon Hospital. I grew up in Warner Robins. My mom and dad were school teachers. I grew up working on our family farms. My wife Bonnie and I actually met in 1st grade in Warner Robins. We've been married 42 years. We've been blessed with 2 sons and 3 grandsons. I'll tell you, one of my first paying jobs was in Warner Robins in a program that taught preschoolers how to read. When you teach a child, show a child a book for the first time and you teach them to read, that never leaves you. And I've carried that with me all my life. Like many of you, I worked my way through college. I graduated from Georgia Tech working construction jobs and warehouse jobs. But in this race, I'm learning how to say, "Go Dogs." For you tech guys, don't worry, I'm still there. But I started a career right here in Georgia after tech and with a firm that worked with manufacturing companies in towns like Eastman, Cochran, and Moultrie. And we spent about the first half of our career right here in Georgia. After that, my family and I took off, literally, climbing in the career that we had and rising to senior positions later in companies like Reebok, Sara Lee, and later being chairman and CEO of Dollar General, where I oversaw the rapid expansion of that firm, adding thousands of jobs and creating thousands of new stores. I've never been in politics before, but I got in this because I felt like we had a full-blown crisis in our country, and I thought I could add value. If you look at the debt that we have today, $18 trillion almost, but that's not the worst of it. What we're not talking about is another $86 trillion coming at us in unfunded future liabilities. The total's over $100 trillion. That's $1 million for every household in our country. It's the greatest threat to our national security and our very way of life. And that's not the end of it. Even after putting $3.5 trillion into our economy, this economy is flat right now because of bad government policies. Today, we have fewer people working as a percentage of our working force than we've had since Jimmy Carter was president. The majority of small businesses have either stopped hiring or have cut back hiring because of overregulation. You got to look at this situation and try to figure out, how did we get in this mess? I think to answer that question first, you've got to look at the makeup of the United States Senate. Today, we only have about 10 people in the United States Senate who have any business experience. And even those 10 people have been in elected office longer, on average, than they were in business. So we have very few people up there who understand the free enterprise system. And combine that with the gridlock, the self-imposed gridlock that we have up there, and you end up with this failed administration creating devastating rules for you and me out here in the working world. But the gridlock up there is not necessary. On Harry Reid's desk today are over 300 bills that have been passed in the House. Some of these bills had 2/3 majorities. That means they were bipartisan bills. But they're stuck on Harry Reid's office, or in his office, because of one reason. That allows this president to run our government with executive order and regulatory mandate. It's created just a failed administration. Any measure, foreign policy, immigration, health care, education, the debt, the economy. But it doesn't have to be this way. We need to get back to the founding principles of our founders, conservative principles, economic opportunity, fiscal responsibility, limited government, individual liberties. If we do that, we win this race, we take back the Senate from Harry Reid, and we start getting results again in Washington. Together, we can turn America back toward a position of strength and prosperity. Thank you for having us. I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next opening statement now from Michelle Nunn.
Thank you, John. And thank you, David. It's good to be in this conversation with you. And thanks to the Chamber. You all have a tremendous turnout here, and it's a testament to the great work that you're doing in the state and the leadership that you're showing on behalf of the business community. I see a lot of folks in this audience that I've worked with over the last number of decades. 26 years ago, I gathered with a small group of people at Manuel's Tavern, and we had our first public meeting there, and we went from a few dozen people with a dream to mobilize volunteers to a network that included hundreds of thousands of people across the country. And eventually, 7 years ago, we merged with President George H.W. Bush's Points of Light organization. And together, we created an organization that last year mobilized 4 million volunteers. We used to send out a little postcard with 5 or 6 projects on it to deliver meals to people who are homebound or tutor kids, and we now complete over 20,000 projects every single month. So I've seen what happens when we apply creativity and entrepreneurship and innovation to getting things done. I know what it means to take an organization from just a couple of $1,000s to a $30 million budget. I know what it means, like you all do, to have to make payroll, to try and determine how to cover your employees with health care. And I also know what it means to always make hard choices, but with the end in mind of creating and sustaining a lasting and stronger organization than the way that you found it. And perhaps the most important lesson that I learned and I carry with me, the values that I really work side by side with volunteers to really find common ground, to collaborate, to problem solve with a focus on getting things done for people and putting aside differences. Like you, I've sat through lots of business meetings and church meetings and PTA meetings, and people don't always get along, and y'all know that. But I'll tell you, they keep at it. They don't walk out, they don't shut down, they keep going, and they solve real problems. And that's what we need more of in Washington. And that's what I take with me. I hear that from people all over the state. And they also tell me, there are some common sense things we can do to solve problems. We need to invest in our infrastructure. We need to alleviate the regulatory burden that are strangling small businesses, reform our tax code and reduce the corporate tax rate. We need to tackle our long-term debt. We do need to work to do that in a bipartisan fashion. And we also need to invest in our kids and invest in education. So we need to provide the certainty to folks like you to be able to invest. And we need to break the gridlock in Washington. And that's what I've been talking about actually sending someone to Washington who's focused on partnership and getting things done together. But that's not what I've heard from David over the course of the last year during the campaign. In fact, I've heard some very different kind of tenor. Within minutes of winning the election for the Republican nomination, David said this election is about prosecuting the administration and the president. But I don't agree about that. I actually think that this election is about the hopes, aspirations, dreams of Georgians and fighting for Georgians. David was asked recently if there was an idea that he could work on, a Democratic idea with a Democrat, and he failed to be able to answer that. Couldn't think of one. If you look at his issues, you have support for the government shutdown, against Common Core, something that the Chamber has worked hard around. You have a record that says, I'm against the Farm Bill. That's what David said, the bipartisan Farm Bill. And you also have the refusal to work together around comprehensive immigration reform. So that sounds a lot like Washington as usual to me, and I know that we can do better in Washington, and I know that we must. I know that we must work together. David's allies have been running a lot of TV ads. You've probably seen me standing with President Obama. But I'll tell you what's interesting about that picture is it was taken at President George H.W. Bush's library. And if you widen the lens, President George H.W. Bush is there. So I have the experience of working together across the aisle, of getting things done, even when there are differences of opinion. And I think that's what we need, people who are going to problem solve and not prosecute. And I pledge to be a real partner to Georgia's businesses, workers, and a fierce advocate for Georgia's citizenry. Thank you.
Thank you. Since this is an opening statement, I'm not going to have rebuttal. There will be a closing statement, and perhaps you can work in some responses during the course of the Q&A. Normally my policy is if another candidate is mentioned by the other candidate, then there's a chance to respond, but the opening statement is a little sacrosanct. You can say whatever you want to say. But let's move into questions now. Let's move into the questions. We have 4 basic topic areas, and the first question is on health care, which of course means the Affordable Care Act. These candidates have very differing views on Obamacare. Mr. Perdue, you favor repealing it, and Ms. Nunn, you favor it, but you seem to have some reservations. I'm curious if you could tell us what is it about the Affordable Care Act that seems to prevent you from fully embracing it. What changes would you make if you should go to Washington?
I think that we need to fix some of the things that are not working with ACA. And I've been saying this for the last year. I think that there are challenges with it. It includes, when I'm in Southwest Georgia, people tell me that they're paying among the highest rates in the nation. We need to add a more affordable tier for families and individuals. I also think we need to extend tax credits to small businesses. I was one of the first to raise my hands and say we should delay the employer mandate to make sure that we get it right. And we need to repeal the cuts that are threatening our rural hospitals because Georgia has failed to expand Medicaid. So those are the things that I think we need to fix. And I'm willing to work with whoever is a person of goodwill to do that. I do not think that we need to go backwards. I do not think that we need to be having the same conversation. David has said that he wants to repeal this. You know, I ask you, do we really want to be having this same argument about ACA in 6 years? Can't we actually work together and come together and build upon some of the things that are working? I don't think we want to go back to a time when people who have pre-existing conditions were not able to get health insurance. I meet people every single day who tell me they have health insurance for the first time and they had a pre-existing condition. I don't think we want to go backwards and tell parents that they can't cover their children up until age 26 on their health insurance. I have a father who told me I sleep better at night because I'm able to cover my kids now. And so I think we want to go forwards, not backwards. I think we do not want to be locked into the kind of gridlock that is emblematic of the refusal to actually say, let's work together to focus on what really matters to Georgians. And that is, you know, are they getting quality health care at good prices, and are we getting more people covered? And I think if we keep that end in mind, that we can do good things and that we can actually make a difference in the lives of Georgians.
Thank you. She's really posed my question to you. You want to repeal Obamacare, but how realistic is that? Given the view by many that it's a fait accompli, it's the law of the land, and there's some indications that the Affordable Care Act is slowly gaining public support as the benefits for some become known. Is it unfixable? And what would you put in its place? And what about the time lag?
Well, John, I absolutely think it's unfixable, and I don't think you can repair this. This goes against the very grain of our American heritage. I think we proved back in the 80s that a free enterprise society has a leg up over one that has a managed economy. When we brought down the Soviet Union with the strength of our economies and the power of our ideas. When this president told us we could keep our insurance, I'm not sure what he meant by that. Like you, millions of Americans have actually had their insurance canceled. My wife and I actually had our own personal insurance canceled. We had a high deductible, catastrophic coverage. It was perfect for us with a major carrier. We were told that wasn't good enough. So we now have a new policy that my federal government says is okay for me. It has a lot of things I don't need, and my rates double. The problem is that this government has not, no government has proven they can manage this big a part of our economy. If you look at how good a job they're doing with the Veterans Administration, then it might give you some indication of what this is going to look like in a few years. In my opinion, it needs to be repealed and replaced. And we have a good alternative out there. There are several, but the one I personally like the best is Congressman Price's own H.R. 2300. It deals with affordability, transportability, insurability. and it doesn't deny access the way this one does. I just don't believe that the bureaucrats in Washington getting between patients and doctors, between doctors and insurance companies, and between insurance companies and patients is a better way to go than the free market solution.
Brief follow-up to both of you. What about the problem at Georgia's rural hospitals that are closing because the federal subsidies are not coming, largely because Georgia did not extend Medicaid?
Well, it's largely coming because of Obamacare. They cut the rates. So my view is that we need to give more power, I think, to the states to deal with and have more flexibility to deal with the priorities that they have in these rural and smaller hospitals that have a disproportionate share of Medicaid and Medicare patients. I personally think that the Medicaid payments to the state should come back in the form of block grants. So that gives the governor and the legislature more flexibility to deal with these needs in the rural communities.
I know you've been vocal on this issue as well. What's your solution to these Georgia rural hospitals going out of business?
I've been talking to folks that run rural hospitals and that are partners to rural hospitals around the state, and the first thing they tell me is that we should have expanded Medicaid as a state, that we are not allowing 650,000 people that could have access to health insurance. We're paying their emergency bills and we're sending the dollars elsewhere. But we haven't done that, so we need to be pragmatic and we need to repeal the cuts that are threatening these rural hospitals. We need to work together to do that. We can't afford to have gridlock. We need to actually fix what's not working and not have a stalemate while folks in rural communities suffer from the continued closure of these hospitals.
Thank you. Let's move to transportation. As you know, Georgia gets about half of its road building funds from the Federal Highway Trust Fund, which is running on empty. It's depleted. The gas tax is the basis for the Highway Trust Fund. It hasn't been raised since 1993. And to compound the problem with it not keeping up with inflation, you have Americans driving less and driving more fuel-efficient cars, which means less gas purchase, thus less revenue for the Highway Trust Fund. But if Georgia loses those federal funds, it would be a big blow. Road projects would come to a halt. You said you will not raise taxes under any circumstances, Mr. Perdue, but what's the alternative to raising the gas tax to keep those federal funds flowing to Georgia?
Well, John, thank you. This is a perfect example of what happens when big government tries to allocate our resources out here. This is a much bigger issue. It's not just the roads. It's our entire infrastructure. We're spending a fraction of what we need to be spending in our infrastructure just to maintain it, not necessarily to improve it so we can be competitive with other countries around the world. If you look at the Port of Savannah as one example, it's taken us 17 years to get approval through the EPA and our legal system to deepen that port 5 feet. 5 feet. In the meantime, China's added one of their major ports in the last 3 or 4 years. We're losing our competitive edge because we're not paying attention to our infrastructure. It's one of the 5 basic precepts of economic development: regulatory control, educated workforce, water, cheap power, and infrastructure. That's how you grow an economy. The problem right now in every one of those areas, we've got difficulties. In this specific case, we have hope. There's $480 billion of redundant agency expenses in our federal budget. I said that right, $480 billion of redundant agencies. We don't have a problem of not having enough money. We have a problem of it's not going to the right purposes. Investment in infrastructure, our roads, our ports, our airports, our rail, absolutely have economic return for our economy. That's where that money needs to be spent, not in redundant agencies.
No vote for a gas tax hike?
No, sir.
All right. Same question to you, Ms. Nunn. Would you vote for a hike in the gas tax, which hasn't been raised since 1993, to keep federal trust fund dollars coming to Georgia?
I do not believe that we should be raising taxes either. I also share David's sensibility about the importance of infrastructure. I think we have to find ways of investing in our infrastructure. We have a D+ grade from our civil engineers. China's spending 3 times what America is spending on our infrastructure. So we have to have the capacity to work together. We also need to, we talked about certainty in Washington. We can't keep kicking this can down the road with 3-month extensions or 6-month extensions. We need to have a long-term view around this. And I think, again, what it takes is statesmen who are going to work across the aisle, people who are going to embrace partnership in getting things done. I think the Savannah port and the deepening of the harbor is a perfect example of this. It did take almost 17 years to get that done, and I think the example and I think the real illustration of why we need to change that is that we have too many people who are not willing to work together to get the kinds of things done that we all know are practical and need to happen. So, unlike David, though, I don't believe that you can prosecute your way to a port. I think you have to be able to work with the president. You have to work together across the aisle in Congress in order to get it done. And that's what we need more of in Washington, and I do think that is essential to creating the conditions for economic growth.
I really have to follow up for both of you because the Highway Trust Fund is empty. It has to be funded. In fact, there's I believe a bipartisan move in the Senate to do that. So this talk is wonderful, but the road building projects are online. The bulldozers are ready to go. They need the money. What do you do in the short term to keep the money flowing? Ms. Nunn.
I do think that there are purposeful choices that we need to make about how we invest. We know that investment in infrastructure, investment in education creates returns and enables growth. And it's actually the way that we do enable more funds to have the capacity for feeding the things that we need to get done. So I think it is about, we do have duplication in government. We do have to make choices. And I would make the choice to invest in our infrastructure as a part of a strategic outline working together with others in Congress.
Well, briefly, what do you do if the funds run dry and the bulldozers can't
they're already
get cranked
dry,
up?
John, but that's, we have that in so many areas in our country today. I mean, we have ways and means right now in the Congress between the House and the Senate to actually take care of that, but they got to reallocate, reprioritize how that money gets spent. That's what we send them up there to do. Just to add a new gas tax here is the easy way out. That would be an easy answer. But we have an $18 trillion debt, John. And more than that, we have another $86 trillion of things that we're not even talking about yet. And here we are going to add another tax on the back of small businesses and individuals. There's a better way to do this if the people in Congress would get together and just get it done.
Thanks very much. Next topic area is immigration. As you know, the Immigration Reform Act passed the Senate in bipartisan fashion, never came to a vote in the House because of conservative Republican opposition. You have indicated you favor that bipartisan bill in the Senate, but President Obama, in the next few weeks, is going, we are told, to make an executive action announcement. We don't know what he's going to say, but there's considerable speculation that he may attempt to find ways to make it easier for the 11 million, maybe not all 11 million, but some of those illegal immigrants in this country to gain legal status. My question to you, Michelle Nunn, is do you think the president, in absence of congressional action, should take action, and what would you like to have him say?
Well, let me start by saying that I do support the bipartisan comprehensive legislation that was really worked very hard towards by folks like the Chamber and unions and Farm Bureau and folks as diverse as Chuck Schumer and Marco Rubio. So when all those people agree, I think it's something that you need to take a real look at. And this is, I think, probably one of the sharper contrasts that you'll find between David and myself. I think David embraces what I believe is the attitude of gridlock in Washington that has not enabled us to get this done. You know, we talk about what's happening on the border. The immigration bill that was passed in the Senate would have enabled us to invest in 20,000 security agents on the border, and a surveillance system that would have made a real difference already. So, you know, when you look at what David has said about this, not only did he oppose this, but he actually ran ads distorting the position of the chamber, the compromise position that many folks in this room worked towards creating. And you know, I don't think that that's what we need. You know, David also sat in a room with the folks at the chamber and said, you know, after 10 minutes that he walked out in anger. He said that. And so, you know, this is the kind of issue that we need to be able to stay at the table, to work out, to actually make a difference around, and really address our economy, jobs, and the deficit. All of the economists that I've read and talked to say this is the right thing to do for our country, and we need to move forward with it. But I do believe that we need to have Congress and the President work together. We need to get out of the executive order business and into the compromising collaboration and partnership business in Washington.
Do I read that to say you would prefer President Obama not to call an executive action?
Yeah, I believe that, again, we should have Congress making the kinds of compromises in partnership with the executive branch that will enable us to do this legislatively and not executively.
Thank you very much. You said we can't really talk about comprehensive immigration reform until we secure the border. But surely you have thought about and have some ideas about what to do about the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, many of whom are important to this state's economy, in particular the state's agriculture industry. What do you do about these folks? Do you deport them? What's your solution? And also, I'd like to get your comments on the expected executive action by the President.
Well, I think the fact that implied amnesty is on the table is one reason why we have the debacle on our border today. I mean, this has been this president's position all along. I disagree with that. I think the first thing that we have to do is break this complex issue into its components. It's what you do every day in business. And the first component that we have got to solve is, are we going to follow the law of the land? Are we going to enforce the laws that we already have on the books? And that's to protect our borders and secure our borders. I frankly think it's more than an immigration issue. It's a national security issue. You know, today, the immigration issue, though, is broader than just illegal immigrants. 40% of the people that are here illegally came in on a legal visa. They just overstayed the visa. So this federal government, our bureaucracy, is not even enforcing the visa laws that we have. In addition, if you look at the legal immigration problem, it may be as big or bigger than the illegal problem. And that is that we're bringing in twice as many legal immigrants today as we did during the two highest periods of our history, 1880 to 1920, and then again in the 80s. And this has not been a bipartisan go along, get along kind of thing. This is not Congress hasn't weighed in. This is this president with executive orders doing this. I really believe that we've got to take a comprehensive look at this because there are needs. Having grown up in Warner Robins and worked on farms, I understand the needs of farmers to get access to legal labor. And right now, the H-2A program is built by bureaucrats for bureaucrats and is very cumbersome for these farmers. And I believe that it needs to be streamlined, more control put back in the state so they can have access to legal labor.
Next general area of inquiry is defense. The military bases in Georgia are very important to the state's economy. We know we lost Fort Gillem and Fort McPherson and the Naval Supply School in Athens in the last BRAC, the Base Realignment and Closure Commission. That was back in '05. And there's word that there may be another BRAC coming up in the next couple of years, which raises the question, could Dobbins Air Reserve Base be on the line? Could Robbins Air Force Base be on the line? My question to each of you, really, and I'll start with you, David Perdue. As a freshman senator, what can you do to protect Georgia's military bases and be sure that the cuts in defense, which are coming, don't endanger the national security?
Well, I grew up in Warner Robins, Robins Air Force Base, just down the road. If you listen quietly as we leave here, you may hear a few planes going off. But as I was growing up, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was riding a bicycle to football practice and listening and watching about every 4 or 5 minutes, a KC-135 tanker or a B-52 took off, going to do their racetrack route around Cuba. And as a young kid, I thought, man, oh man, how important it is to have that kind of security. Of course, that was a time when they had the nuclear bomb threat training thing in our schools where, you know, we've all been there. You get under your desk, right? But in all seriousness, I believe that the greatest threat to our national security and to our defense is this debt and the fact that we're not taking it seriously. If you look at what we're trying to do around the world right now, we've confused our allies and encouraged our enemies because of this confused foreign policy that we have. To have a strong foreign policy, you have to have a strong defense. But to have a strong defense, as we proved with the Soviet Union in the 1980s, you have to have a strong economy. And you can't be borrowing at the level that we're borrowing right now internationally and do that. I believe that if another BRAC round comes, that this state, and being a freshman senator, I'll be fighting to grow the economy to help make sure that we have a strong defense. But I'll work with these private organizations like 21st Century and the Chambers of Commerce around the state to make sure that we communicate the strategic intent of these bases and also the strategic importance of our geographic location. These bases are not here by mistake, and I intend to keep them here. Thank you.
Michelle Nunn, as you know, Georgia has long historically been somewhat protected from military cutbacks. Back in the day when Walter George, Richard Russell, even your dad, Sam Nunn, not to mention your great-uncle Carl Vinson, they were all part of the establishment that kept bases secure here, but those days are gone. So the same question to you: how do you, as a freshman senator, protect the military bases in Georgia, which are of great importance to local communities economically, and be sure that defense cuts, when they come, do not endanger the national security in a time of such world peril?
Well, I have been able to travel around and meet with base communities, and the folks that are doing such a good job, 21st Century Partnership here at Robbins. And, you know, we have such a proud heritage of support for our military here in Georgia. With our 9 bases, 140,000 men and women that serve under DOD, $20 billion worth of economic impact here in our state, second highest enlistment rate of any state in the country in our military. And so the first thing I would say is that I disagree with those in Washington and the president who believe that this is the time to cut our military. I don't believe that. I believe that the world is a dangerous place right now. We have asked our men and women to sacrifice enormously over the last decade plus, and we need to continue to have the strongest and best military in the world. We have a wonderful heritage of bipartisan leadership here in Georgia. I've heard my dad say on a number of occasions, he says not to brag, but there was never a brat closure during his 24 years in the Senate. And that's not a coincidence. I think that we need someone who is going to commit to being a steward on the Armed Services Committee, and I have committed to do that. I think we need someone who is going to really work to preserve and protect those bases, but also to help expand their missions. I was at Kings Bay recently, and they have 20% additional capacity there. We need to be bringing the capacity to continue to contribute to our military here to Georgia. I do think that gridlock is the enemy of our capacity here. And if you look at sequestration, for instance, I was talking to a major general in the Marines. He said that sequestration has done more to hurt our military readiness than anything he can think of over the last number of decades. The government shutdown, which David said that he was for, furloughed 4,000 folks just down the road here at Robbins. So we need to work together to preserve and protect our military bases and, in a broader sense, our military capacity as a nation.
Any rebuttal on the support of the shutdown?
No, not at all. I think that speaks for itself. I think it was, you know, the situation that we had in Washington was over Obamacare. What I was saying was that we cannot default on our interest payment. This is one of the things that's just sacrosanct, and I thought we had a lot of people beginning to talk about that.
All right. Well, we have covered the 4 basic topic areas that the candidates agreed to, and I wish we could keep going, but under the rules that we have, the forum is approaching conclusion. It is time now for the closing statements, and by prior agreement, flip of the coin, the order was determined, and Michelle Nunn has the first 2-minute closing statement.
Thank you. Well, first of all, John, thank you. David, thank you. I look forward to more spirited conversations over the next few months, and thanks again to the Chamber for hosting such a terrific gathering. I was here last year with you all. I was just getting my campaign started, and you were honoring Saxby Chambliss, and you were honoring him for a number of achievements, but one of those achievements that was highlighted was his work with Mark Warner, Senator Warner, on the long-term debt. And I think that kind of bipartisanship, that kind of statesmanship, that kind of collaboration is what we need more of in Washington. And it's been the theme of my campaign. As I've traveled around the state, I think it's been responsible for the kind of energy and excitement that we've seen. We had 200 people that were here in the hot sun waiting for us when we got here, just to say we're ready for real change and we're ready for the kind of civility that you want to bring to Washington. And it's responsible for the 50,000 plus folks that have either given their time or their resources to the campaign. And it's at the heart of taking on the issues that we can deal with a practical and pragmatic sensibility. Some of the issues that we've talked about here today: protecting and preserving our national defense, comprehensive immigration reform, and making sure that we're investing in the right things, smart things like infrastructure, and like our kids, like education. And so I believe David and I do have different real-world experiences. I have an experience that's been about lifting people up for the last 26 years, building and growing organizations, and getting things done for the people of Georgia in a collaborative way, in a proven way of working across differences and party lines. I think that's what we need more of. I don't think we need more prosecutors. I think we need more problem solvers. And I think we need more collaboration and less conflict. And that's what I pledge to bring. And I've been telling people all over the state that I'm interested in carrying forward the Georgia motto values: wisdom and justice and moderation. So I invite y'all to join with me in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the closing statement, 2 minutes from David Perdue.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you guys again for hosting us today. You know, our politicians have created a full-blown crisis in America. I think it's going to take somebody from the outside with the right experience to make a difference. I believe in this race we should be talking about the issues and priorities that address that crisis. Americans always do well dealing with crisis. I've been very clear about my priorities throughout this entire campaign. I believe that we've really got to get serious about stopping the devastation of Obamacare. 2, I really think that we've got to get serious about stopping this outrageous spending and rein in our out-of-control expenditures. The third thing is we've got to grow our economy and create jobs. That happens by reforming our tax structure, reducing regulations, and unlocking our energy resources. And the fourth thing, yes, we need to secure our borders and create an immigration system that makes sense in a free society that has the rule of law. I just believe that this race is very simple, the decision in this race. If you like what's going on in Washington, then vote for my opponent, because you know she'll be nothing more than a proxy for Harry Reid and Barack Obama, and nothing will change. But if you're as outraged as I am by the size and scope of this government, by the arrogant policies that are failing of this administration, and by the sheer magnitude of the debt they're piling on the backs of our kids and grandkids, then stand with me and let's take our country back. Together we can bring America back to a position of strength and prosperity. Thank you again for having us today, and I look forward to future conversations, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you both for stimulating exchange of ideas in this forum, and I'm sure this will not be the last time the two of you are on stage together as the campaign continues to build momentum heading toward Election Day in November. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your attention. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Don, thanks. Very nice job.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Clark. I'm president of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you, and would you join me again in thanking John for moderating today and for Michelle and David for being with us. Thank you, John. This Senate race is extremely important. It could determine who controls the United States Senate, but it's not the only race that we're undergoing right now. Every constitutional officer in Georgia has opposition. We have many members of Congress who are facing opposition this year. We have several seats in the House and the Senate here in Georgia that are up for grabs, and of course many, many local races as well. That's why as a business community we have to be involved to make sure that we are electing pro-business, economic development, job creation, Democrats and Republicans, both at the state level and the national level. And that means the business community has got to get engaged. It's very important. You need to talk to the candidates, get to know those candidates. You need to also support those candidates. But one of the most important things you can do is on November 4th, go vote and encourage your employees to do the same. We should be ashamed as a state when we have such low voter turnout. We deserve better than that. And so the Georgia Chamber is making a commitment to continue to be engaged in the political process through our Political Action Committee. We have a little booth outside. We'd love for you to stop by and learn more about it so that you can work with us there. But the most important thing is that we do engage, and as a business community, we go vote. I hope that you will join me in thanking our partners today, the Georgia Association of Broadcasters and Georgia News Network. Thank you very much. Appreciate y'all can applaud at that. I'll also want to thank our good friends from WMAZ who made it possible for people to stay home today and still see this first debate. Thank you to our friends at WMAZ. And our host today here in Macon, Mayor Rickert, we appreciate you and what you're doing, and Mike Dyer and the Macon Chamber. Thank y'all for the great partnership that we have and all that you guys do here. I want to thank again our sponsors, including our presenting sponsor, AT&T. Beth, thank you for all that AT&T does for the state of Georgia. We appreciate it. So this concludes our program, but a year from now, we're going to be back here in Middle Georgia, and we will be celebrating our 100th anniversary of the Georgia Chamber. We'll be spending next year celebrating what business has done. We'll be celebrating the partnership between government and business, and we hope that you'll join us here for a special event the same time next year. We are adjourned. God bless, and drive safe home. Thank y'all.